that other album that I showed from R.E.M. that I can't think of the name of right now. Um, which is great for a video when you're trying to reference shit.
What's the status, Gladys? Welcome to a Thursday Collection Connection. We're playing another round of that game. It's just an excuse to talk about records. I play the game with my brother, Plastic Eric, from the Plastic Soundwave Cults channel. He makes his moves every Monday. I'm every Thursday. We make connections to albums in each other's collections, just kind of a way to keep in touch with each other. And we do it every week. So here we go. In Eric's last video, he talked about R.E.M's Green. That was a significant album for me. It was the first R.E.M. album that I owned. They appeared on my radar, I feel like, with their cover of All You Have to Do Is Dream, the Everly Brothers, from the Athens, Georgia Inside Out soundtrack. But I was aware of them from Fall on Me, and of course their first kind of big hit, which was the one I love. So the singles from Document, but it wasn't until Green that I actually took the plunge and bought an R.E.M. record. So possibly because of that, because it was my starting point, it remains kind of one of my top three. I think the album that Eric was trying to think of was Life's Rich Pageant in the opening there. It's also one of my top three. And unusually, I would put 1999's Up in my top three. So I know I'm definitely in a minority there after Bill Berry was out of the band to say that Up is one of my favorite R.E.M. records. My relationship with R.E.M. then is somewhat atypical, especially for sort of hardcore fans. I was not aware of them from the beginning. We were actually in England where they first released material, and they didn't make any waves at all in England until much later. And that actually is key to my connection, which I'll get to in a moment. Once I had Green, I kind of went back and I think I bought the eponymous compilation. There's sort of IRS years comp to get most of those singles. And then over the course of time, I bought all their back catalog. I have every R.E.M. album now, all of their studio albums. But Green remains a sturdy favorite. I love Pop Song 89. I love the kind of the cheekiness of it. And I think the title, my understanding of the title Green, was that it was multifaceted. There was green as in sort of naive, like he's so green, innocence. There was green as in ecologically minded green. And lastly, and most importantly for my connection, there's green as in money, because it was a tongue-in-cheek acknowledgement that Green was their first album after moving from IRS to Warner Brothers on a major label. So for their sixth record, they jumped onto a major label. So Green was their major label debut for Warner Brothers, and they remained on Warner Brothers until they packed it in I think 2011 with their last album. It's my turn to draw a blank on album titles. Anyway, I want to say Accelerate, but they had one after Accelerate, and Into the Collapse, maybe something about collapsing. But for having every R.E.M. album, I'm not necessarily a huge R.E.M. fan. They were a sturdy band that was sort of hard for me in the music circles that I was in to avoid. Not that I was trying to avoid them, but you would hear the songs, and some of the songs are so good that I feel compelled, to buy the album and keep up with them. And I did see them live for the Monster Tour, kind of the last big stadium. I've only ever been to a couple of big stadium tours or arena tours. and I saw them in DC in the 94, 95, whenever it was they were touring for that. Yeah, so they are a band that was a big, important, influential band that I bought all of their records despite admiring them more than loving them. I certainly like them. I think "Fall on Me" is a great single, and they had a ton of great singles, a lot of good deep album tracks. But for all that, I never listed them amongst my personal favorite bands. And the band that I think of as the R.E.M. of the 90s that sort of followed both a similar career trajectory and mirrored my own personal experience with them is the band Death Cab for Cutie. And their debut on a major label came with their fifth record. And they moved from Barsuk, I think, from their early records onto Atlantic Records, where they are to this day. And their first record for Atlantic Records was Plans from 2005. And similarly to R.E.M., I became aware of Death Cab. They first showed up on my radar around the time of their last independent album, Transatlanticism. And that was the first one that I bought from them. And similarly to R.E.M., they remained a band that had some songs that I loved. I had no problem with buying the records, but I've never thought of them as being amongst my favorite bands. Some of the material is strong. I could probably put together a compilation, a full album-length compilation of Death Cab songs that I think are absolutely killer. But they kind of did the classic path of put out a couple of EPs. R.E.M. had Chronic Town. Death Cab had a couple of EPs before they got to put out a full album, record, gain notoriety, gain an audience, and then when the public at large seems to be starting to knock on your door a little bit, as they were with Document for R.E.M. and Transatlanticism for Death Cab, that's when a major label swoops in and really gives them an international boost. And that was the thing about R.E.M. So it wasn't really until they were on Warner Brothers, and Warner Brothers with the marketing muscle to market them around the world, that R.E.M. really started to get overseas success. They were a fairly American phenomenon up until that point. Similarly, Death Cab made their series of albums and became a much larger band that was marketed worldwide once they were on Atlantic Records. It's a good, solid debut. The singles here were Soul Meets Body and Crooked Teeth, which sort of has an inverted sort of riff of the Kinks picture book, and that we made a connection once upon a time to the fact that Green Day's Warning basically lifts the entire hook, the riff from the Kinks picture book. Crooked Teeth has a very similar feeling hook, but it feels sort of inverted, where it's rather than climbing and falling off, it's like it's falling and then climbing up. But it's still a boom boom. But I hadn't busted this out in a little while. Listening to it reminded me it's a good solid album. It was a good album to find, to purchase in their catalog. It wasn't a disappointment, so it's not like I was one and done or two and done, since I'd already bought Transatlanticism with them. It felt like they were building onto it, and it does contain two songs. The third single, I Will Follow You Into the Dark, and another track called Different Names for the Same Thing, that fall into that category of songs that I just really, really like. They're back-to-back, kind of right in the heart of the record. I Will Follow You Into the Dark feels like such an album closer, but it surprises me to remind myself that it's not. It's actually right in the middle of the record. It may have started side 2 if there was a vinyl release of it, but this is well into the CD era, 2005, and kind of before the vinyl revival. So I don't think that they would have programmed it that way necessarily. So it's just kind of tucked right in the middle of the record. I'm personally convinced that I Will Follow You, not I Will Follow You into the Dark, but Different Names for the Same Thing was written as a potential finale track for the HBO series 6 Feet Under. I really feel like where they used the Sia song, Breathe, in that big final montage, I feel like this was Death Cab's attempt, like their submission for that final track. Just the subject matter, the way the song is structured, kind of in two halves, really feels to me, it's a longer track. It's kind of languid, but it picks up and has both a melancholy yet hopeful sort of second half that is mostly instrumental. That seemed like it was made to go with that montage, that long montage. So you start with the daughter, whose name I don't even remember anymore, driving away to go live her life. And that would be kind of the lyric portion of the song. And then as it speeds away into the long montage of how everybody on the show eventually passes away, that it would be the instrumental back half of the song. I have no proof of this whatsoever. It's just something that struck me at the time. I think the timing is right. And I thought at the time, because it was fresh in my mind, that would have been a really great track to go over that final montage. But anyway, that's my thought. So I don't have every single Death Cab album. I'm missing a couple of the early ones. I don't have the first or third one, I think. The photo album and something about airplanes I do not have. But I have all the rest of theirs. So similarly, for a band that I enjoy and I like and I admire, who aren't necessarily reinventing the wheel the same way, weirdly, that R.E.M. was not reinventing the wheel, that they were a very, guitar, bass, drums kind of band, that they could be doing something so different, both from the music of the 70s and the sort of the new wave and the synth pop of the 80s, that felt so kind of fresh and different. R.E.M. being really the progenitors, I would say, of alternative music in the 1980s. Similarly, they got big. Death Cab never got quite as globally big as R.E.M. did in the 90s, where through a couple of albums, you could argue that they were the biggest band in the world. I don't know that Death Cab has ever gotten quite that high, but they're sort of ubiquitous. The ubiquity of R.E.M. that seemed like they were kind of everywhere once they reached that global status. Death Cab seems like they've hit the same plateau, and now they're respected industry veterans, still rolling along. Ben Gibbard as the leader, kind of the central figure. Used to be, I think, Ben Gibbard and Chris Walla, but he left a couple of albums ago. Yeah, so now they're kind of elder statesmen, a bit out of step with the times, the way R.E.M. became out of steps with the times in the 2000s themselves. And yeah, so anyway, a major label debut from a longtime band is The Connection, from R.E.M.'s Green, a great record, to Death Cab for Cuties, Plans, another very strong record. And Eric will try and find a connection to this album, and he will present his connection on Monday on the Plastic Sound Wave Cult channel. And with that, that's all I got. So I thank you for watching.